This is the Secular Nation Podcast, an official production of the Atheist Alliance of America, bringing you breaking news and stories about the intersection of the atheist free thought movement and government action.
We're here with Justin Scott, secular activist with the Freedom from Religion Foundation, and Eastern Iowa atheist. Also, Dr. Juhem Navarro-Rivera, a political scientist and researcher in a certain Washington, D.C. think tank, which will not be named. He's also a contributing author to Secular Scholarship. Gentlemen, welcome to the show, and I've asked you to both to come on here to give your perspective on the coming administration and what do secular activists have facing us.
Well,
dun.
Well, Justin, you're more in the trenches than I am, so I think you should go first.
Well, I was going to say you're more highly qualified than I am, but I appreciate that, and I appreciate being invited to the show. I've only been an activist for the last year, and it's kind of crazy to see where things were a year ago when the Iowa caucuses kicked things off where I live, to now being, 20 days away from a brand new president and a new administration. So, yeah, I've been trying to prepare myself along with many different groups and how we're going to face this and take it on. But, yeah, I'm excited to share some of my experiences and my thoughts for the future, definitely.
Well, thank you for having me here. And yeah, I'm thinking the same, first it has been a very long election season that lasted 2 years. I think the next one is going to start probably next month with first person announcing. So we're going to have like a 4-year potential presidential race coming up. But, in many ways was unpredictable. To say the least. And it has shown us so much about, the country we think we live in, the country we actually live in, but also how narratives are shaped, right? Because at the end of the day, even when President-elect Trump won the Electoral College, it was a very small margin. And so now we are hearing this narrative about, either the white working class or the revolt against the elites. But the fact is that most people actually voted for Secretary Clinton. And also if the margins had been the same and the result had been flipped, we'll be talking about the big rejection of Trump, even if that didn't happen. We also have to keep in mind how close this election was, and not buy into Trump's narrative that he won by a landslide. And so I think the biggest lesson is that the country is deeply divided. At least they have that, or 60% or so that ended up voting. It's deeply divided, and that contrary to probably any other Republican nominee or Democratic nominee, we are in an era of uncertainty in terms of what we're seeing, how he's arming his or mounting his cabinet tells us a little bit or a lot of what they're going to shape policy. But at the same time, given how blank a slate he was on what he wanted to do, we don't really have an idea of what actually is going to be a priority, what's going to happen, and if he's going to have priorities or going to move day by day. So I think that that's one of the most rare things about the 2016 election, which is that there's a lot of uncertainty in American politics that hasn't been there in a long time.
Well, I'm certainly feeling uncertain. I mean, everything that he puts up in his cabinet, I look at with alarm. I mean, it is as if the incoming administration was assembled by Mad Magazine. It's like, can we find the least qualified person for president and then have him nominate the least qualified people for every position that he needs?
Right. And even to appoint people that have totally said that they do not agree with the department that they're going to be heading. That's the part.
Yeah,
that's the part that floors me.
Yeah, putting Rick Perry in charge of the Department of Energy, putting a creationist in charge of the Department of Education, and so forth.
Absolutely.
But Joe, I mean, you brought up something that's important. I mean, like, okay, if this close margin had been flipped the other way, we'd already seen just prior to the election, we had Trump supporters that were saying that there was going to be a revolution if their man didn't win. That, you know, that not only had they spent the last 8 years fighting against everything that Obama tried to do and making these announcements that the Congress was going to stand against the president on every decision that he ever tried to initiate. When it comes up to the time of electing Trump, they were threatening a rebellion, that there was going to be a revolution if their man didn't win. So their man won, barely, partially by the Electoral College only. And now suddenly they're telling, you know, that the people that did not support that particular candidate that, you know, why don't we give him a chance, and why won't we be nice and tolerant like they have not been this whole time?
Yeah, I think that's rather interesting, particularly because there's, you know, this irony of of the fact that, yeah, they haven't, you know, a lot of Trump supporters weren't ready to recognize the election, which was a real, you know, a real danger, and that people underestimate. You know, one of the important parts of a democracy is a peaceful transition of power. And if that doesn't happen, and, you know, to the extent that Obama had a peaceful transition of power because he was led to take office, he actually didn't have a very smooth stay in power. You know, I think there's another aspect in this, and it's giving Trump the benefit of the doubt, but I don't know for what. I mean, even for many of his supporters, he's kind of like a, you know, this blank slate that we've been talking about. And now we are seeing all these reports of Trump supporters now regretting, after seeing what he's attempting to do or seemingly doing policy-wise, particularly in case of Medicare, Social Security potentially, and on Obamacare, the Affordable Care Act.
Just to keep me up to date, I mean, what is it that he's now saying that he's doing that isn't what he said he was going to do or wasn't expected to do? I mean, the first thing we were told was that he was going to abolish Obamacare, and then he said in another interview that he wasn't going to abolish, but he keeps flipping, and so you never know what he's actually going to do pretty much until he does it.
Although that's certainly the case, but we do know that the Republican House and Senate have very, well-planned plans, for lack of a better word, to certainly get rid of or minimize the social safety net. So to the extent that they go on with those plans, and this is something we don't know to what extent he is going to cooperate with them and become a Republican, a run-of-the-mill Republican, at least on that conservative orthodoxy on the role of government, or he's actually gonna be some sort of populist who supports the social safety net, but, you know, maybe with some restrictions like gender and race, some sort of segregation or apartheid kind of type, in which, you know, some groups explicitly benefit more than others rather than implicitly benefiting more than others.
Well, he was supposed to have drained the swamp, and rather than draining the swamp, it looks like he's filled his cabinet with the scum, so to speak. He was supposed to abandon Obamacare, and he was supposed to have Hillary Clinton investigated and indicted or arrested and all this. He then turns against everything that he said. But, you know, one of the reasons that people told me that we should vote for Trump, the reason people were giving for why I should vote for Trump, was that, don't worry, he's just lying. He's not actually going to do the things he's promising he should do, so you should vote for him. That's a reason to vote for a president. Well, there was the other reason, which is that don't worry, he won't be able to get anything done because Congress is going to oppose him because the Republican Party hates that he's not a real Republican, so they won't allow anything he tries to do to go through. That's a reason to vote for him. These are the reasons given for why I should vote for why atheists should vote for Trump.
It's mind-blowing. Yeah, it's absolutely disgusting.
Yeah, and I'm always hearing, I mean, the Trump supporters are always saying this is the only defense they have, by the way, is to say that, well, you know, Hillary would have been worse. I don't think Hillary was, let me put this as politely as I can, I do not think that Hillary was an ideal candidate in any sense. But as bad as Hillary might have been, I don't think it is possible that she could have been worse than Trump already has been or demonstrated himself to be with his fantastically abysmal cabinet choices, to say nothing of the threats pitted against the Supreme Court.
Well, I think this election, especially, you know, the psychology of what it seems that has been the Trump phenomenon, is the fact that people, you know, we are at historically low levels of trust in this country in terms of, you know, political institutions or any type of institutions, with the exception of the military, which is the media as well. Yes. But the fact that people think that politicians lie to them all the time, and you have a professional liar running for office, and basically there's this suspension of disbelief that, you know, basically this guy, you know, nothing but he's just saying it for show. He's not going to do anything what he says. He's just like probably the epitome of the lying politician. So, you know, just vote for him because he's not going to do all that crazy stuff that he's saying that he's going to do without, you know, the fact that most politicians, at least, you know, the political science scholarship shows that most elected officials try to do and carry on with their promises, and there are barriers to how much they can do with them. And, you know, whether because you're a member of Congress and you introduce this bill, but it's not going anywhere, or you're a president and, you know, your policies are blocked, or they're harder to implement than you thought at the beginning. But the fact is that politicians do try to do what they promised, and Trump has been doing to some extent what he promised. In terms of drain the swamp, I think it's a discussion I've had with my friends and colleagues and people I know, which is that most people in our world, when we think about drain the swamp, we are thinking that he's promising to get rid of corruption. And what I have realized with what he's doing is that he's not getting rid of corruption. He's getting rid of experts and the people who have failed him, like career bureaucrats, people with experience and knowledge in what they are doing, and replacing them with neophytes or reformers, which are actually less reformers, that they are like blowing up the agencies or the services that they are gonna be running.
Yeah, that was the third reason that people gave me to vote for Trump. Don't worry, he's not going to be able to do the things he's promising because he doesn't know how to. He's incompetent, which is a reason that we were supposed to vote for him. So he's an incompetent liar who won't be able to get anything done. And even if that is the case, which it evidently is, he's appointed people who will do all of this damage. It wouldn't matter what happens with Trump if you have that cabinet standing, because these people all have their own insidious agendas, and they, as we mentioned, with Rick Perry wanting to abolish the department that he's now head of, and we have the creationist in charge of education. Well, obviously she and Pence, the vice president, are going to want to restart the whole teaching creationism in school thing all over again. With renewed vigor now. So I
agree with you. And the thing I was going to say here is what scares me more is that it seems to me like Trump just wants to be the entertainer in chief. And so when he puts these tweets out and he goes on this victory parade, imagine what happens once he's actually inaugurated and he's actually running the country. but he's handing it off to all these other people while he's masquerading as this, you know, savior of our society, savior of our country. Like you said, with all of the cabinet members in the background, tearing down the last 70 years of progress. That truly frightens me, because then you'll get the fact that he's out there saying, well, we can't trust the media. Well, that's right out of a fascist playbook. You know, make the media illegitimate so that whenever they report on something, the wide, you know, everybody in the country doesn't trust them. So then where does our reporting come from? And how do we actually know what they're up to?
And then he doesn't allow any press to travel with him or occupy the positions that the press normally would have occupied. Yeah, this is all very foreboding. What is he incompetent? Clearly, when he went into the office for the first tour, when he was recently elected and they're showing him around, he seems to be completely lost, and he makes this admission that he didn't realize that it would be so much work. Well, great, you were completely unprepared for the job, and now you've got it. Now what? Right? And then his first public speech, his first public address as president-elect, he starts saying, well, yeah, these are things that we say in the campaign trail, but this is now that we've got the office, we don't need to do that anymore, which is an open admission that none of these promises were actually valid. He didn't mean to do any of those things, except perhaps to build the wall, which is going to be fiscally impossible and practically inapplicable. I mean, what situation are we in now?
Yeah, I don't really know. like I told you at the beginning, there's a lot of uncertainty. You have a sort of idea based on his of the people he's naming to positions, that what sort of policies they are interested in following. To what extent he knows those positions, the positions that these people have on issues, and to what extent he just appointing them because they were loyal to him, it's a whole different matter. But also, I think another, just thinking about the uncertainty on domestic policy, I'm also thinking about the uncertainty on international policy, and how foreign policy, it's more of a vacuum that probably domestic policy is, because we have a sense of ideas of what congressional Republicans want to do in terms of, particularly as Justin said, the last 70 years or 80 years of the social safety net, and economic and racial progress that has been done in this country, although, inequality is probably going to continue going up.
So let's talk about all the different avenues that we can approach that. I mean, it had been mentioned that he's not really against gays, like everybody thinks that he's against gays, right? Maybe he's not against gays necessarily per se, but he did say a number of different occasions that he's against gay marriage, that he was disappointed in the Supreme Court, that the Supreme Court should have left that up to the individual states, so that your marriage in one state becomes invalid when you move to another state. You can be married for 10 years in one state, move to another, and suddenly you don't have any of the tax breaks or any of the rights that you had previously. This, he thinks, is a good idea, right? So he says a number of times that he is against gay marriage, that he is for the traditional marriage, right? But we're criticized if we say that he's against gays. I don't know how much more openly against gays he can be without uttering the words, "I'm against gays."
Well, he's against Mexicans, but he loves taco bowls. So who knows?
Do you ever get the sense that he is like the guy in high school that's like the super jock, and he sits around and he says, well, I don't mind the nerds because the nerds are great. They help me out. I peek over their shoulder and I get answers from them. And then when he watches others in his circle beat up the nerds, he sits back and he says, oh, well, you know what? That's not my thing. I like the nerds, but yet doesn't do anything to stop people in his circle. I mean, look at the First Amendment Defense Act. They call it FATA. From what I'm gathering, that's going to be the next RFRA, the Religious Freedom Restoration Act. And this is going to be probably one of the first things that gets brought up. And it's not something new. It's apparently been on the table for years. But now Trump's circle of jocks is going to let it go through, and it's going to have huge ramifications. I mean, economics, you're going to have businesses that can discriminate against everybody and then be safe from any kind of lawsuits. And all the while, he'll be out masquerading like, I'm here for gays. I'm here for the LGBT community. BS, you know?
So we built up a number of advances in like the social rights, for example, and we're going to see all of these torn down. You know, everything, Roe versus Wade, for example, the gay marriage, whatever they can reverse, they will. So every new president has the option to just undo everything that the previous president did. Is that the way our system works?
Well, technically, it could. I think the biggest difference right now is first, I don't think the extent of Trump's victory, but we are at a point in which Democratic opposition is at its lowest in a long time. So we have, a Republican House in majority since 2011. Now we have a Republican majority in the Senate that has, the Senate has moved around from Democratic to Republican control several times in the last couple of decades. But it potentially can grow bigger in 2018. The Republican majority in the Senate.
Remember, this was the election when we thought at one point that the Republican Party was about to die.
I was never convinced of that. People kept saying that the Republican Party was going to die with the Trump candidacy if he lost, but the Republican Party goes beyond, and American political parties go beyond the presidency, right? They already control Congress, and they took control of the Senate, and they were close to controlling the Senate, but they also have a majority of the state houses. So to say that the Republican Party was in disarray was very short-sighted, just looking at the national electoral map of presidential elections. But if you look at the the rest of the map and the rest of the elected officials in this country, the party that is being in disarray for a while has been the Democrats.
Well, that's actually the point that I was going to make. I mean, there was a lot of talk about how the Republican Party was going to die. I had made posts to the effect that I didn't think the Republican Party was going to die because you still have the base that isn't going anywhere. There's a mentality or a position or opinion that isn't going to change just because of the label. But on the Democrat side, this is where I saw the real problem, because there was huge disarray in the side of the Democratic Party. When, as you talk about, low voter turnout, whenever there's low voter turnout, the Republicans win, right? Because why? Because Democrats won't vote. Well, anytime that you can get the Democrats to get the support of the independents, for example, as they had briefly in the primaries here, you want to throw them a bone if you can, and they didn't do that. They not only chose an unpopular candidate, but then when she chose a VP, she chose someone further to the right than she is when she needed the support of the left. And of course, they lost all their momentum. They lost all their initiative. And
what a failure by her to pick a white middle-aged male or older male. She had every opportunity to pick an Hispanic, a Muslim, anybody different. And to go with Mr. Kane, you lost me at that.
It had been speculated that she could have taken Bernie Sanders, and that while that wouldn't have been ideal either, that certainly would have been better. She would have gotten a lot more support if she'd done that. She could have taken Elizabeth Warren, right? And a lot of people were saying, well, you can't have two women on the ticket. Well, why not?
Exactly.
What exactly is the problem?
Two men on the ticket. Oh, never mind.
You mind if I share? Go ahead, Juhem.
No, finish.
Well, I was just going to add, after the Iowa caucus was over, I was invited by American Atheists to go out to CPAC. Are you guys familiar with CPAC? That was the big conservative event where Ben Carson announced.
I bump into them in the streets when they're here.
Yeah, and it was fascinating because as I helped them work their table, if the person walking by was probably 45 or 50 years old and above, we got these death stares like, what the hell are you doing here? American Atheists. why is an atheist at a conservative event? But then, interestingly enough, if you were 35 or younger and walked by, I mean, you were literally smiling ear to ear. You ran up to our table. You said, "Oh my God, atheists at a conservative event. It's like a breath of fresh air." And that was fascinating to me, and kind of like what Aron was saying about how there was reports that the Republican Party was falling apart. I look at the next 20 to 30 years, that party has a real issue that they've got to face. Do you have to be religious to be a conservative? Do you have to be a Christian to call yourself a conservative? And I felt a huge faction between people that called themselves Republicans versus people that called themselves conservatives. Conservatives told me that they hated the word Republican. They didn't want anything to do with it. And that was fascinating. You know, for what it's worth, as an activist, I try to be nonpartisan, but my personal politics are very to the left. I'm socially progressive, fiscally more liberal, but when I'm out there trying to connect with people, none of that comes up because I'm fascinated to hear what this next generation of voters is going to look like. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I have a couple of thoughts. First, you know, I want to go back a little bit before I answer that to the optics of, you know, the Clinton-Kaine ticket. And, you know, one of the things I've been thinking about this election, because it, you know, at the end of the day, the larger narrative has been about, you know, white backlash, particularly against Obama. And so you know, sometimes I wonder if she had picked another woman or a candidate of color as her VP partner, whether she would have lost by more, just because, you know, of the racial optics. And so I think part of that was in her mind, and you know, when they were deciding who to pick, that they were already seeing this white men backlash, and they were trying to basically play it safe and showing that, you know, we have a white dude here as well, generic white dude here, senator. But you know, I think those were parts of the calculations of choosing probably the mildest, uninspiring.
Now, I was looking at the primaries when, you know, I was thinking that if Elizabeth Warren had thrown her hat in to begin with, right? Let's say before Hillary, before Bernie, she makes the announcement that she's going to run for president. Elizabeth Warren at that time in the early part of the primaries would have been a very popular choice. But then a lot of other people say, well, Elizabeth Warren can't run because she doesn't have enough experience. Well, look who the hell they hired. Look who won the election, right? So they were saying that Bernie Sanders didn't have enough experience to be president, right? Passed more bills than any other independent senator, right? He was in the Senate for what, 30 years, something like that. It has this ridiculous tenure, and he doesn't have enough experience. But they get Trump, the least experienced, least qualified person in history, and they're going to judge Elizabeth Warren or Bernie Sanders on their lack of experience, supposedly. Or Hillary on her lack of accomplishment by comparison to a man who has, so far as I know, failed every endeavor he's ever invested in. That's quite a resume.
Yeah. And the thing that's interesting too, you guys talked at first about how Trump has to prove to those that were loyal to him in all the legislation that he enacts and all the decisions that he makes. But what else is interesting is the white supremacist group that supported him, that are making their demands too about what they want. I can't even believe we're talking about that. You know, the fact that we have a president-elect who was endorsed literally by the KKK. Oh my goodness. Give me Elizabeth Warren with no experience any day.
Yeah, early in the primaries at least.
no doubt.
Yeah, the dynamics had obviously changed throughout this process, and a bunch of reputations were altered significantly. But I was looking at early on in these primaries. I was hopeful. I was actually excited. You know, we're finally going to get the type of education system, the type of healthcare system that I had seen in Europe, where they're doing so many things a lot better than we are. And people are saying, well, we can't afford to do that. Well, if other poorer countries can do it, then certainly we can do it, right? It's just a matter of how we work our funds. It's not that tough a trick. But then when you talk about conservatism and people longing for the good old days and then fighting against progress, I've actually had people tell me they are against progress. That's mind blowing to me. Why would you be against progress? That doesn't make any sense. We go back to the good old days before when only white Christian straight men had rights. That's pretty much what they want to go back to. Juhem, do you see it that way?
Well, they say they're against progress. They probably said it in Facebook or Twitter. So they're not against all progress. But no, and I think there's something that Justin was saying before when he was talking about his experiences in CPAC, and it's I think many people thought this election was going to be like the 2050 election when the future electorate was going to dominate, and as Aron, you put it before, this was an election. There was a nostalgia election. This is there was a blast to the past. People were voting to where, I don't know. Many of them mentioned the 1950s as their golden era. Well, that certainly wasn't the golden era for my people. And but in many ways, the policies that they want and the rhetoric they were using was more of akin to the 1920s. But considering the creationists are now running science, we're probably going to be closer to the 1520s in terms of science policy. So, but there's a day's real tension in the future of the Republican Party that's still latent. I mean, even when the young people are still mostly voting for the Democratic Party, secular people are mostly voting for the Democratic Party, Latinos, African Americans, Asian Americans. So all the groups that are growing, that are young, and that are coming up are part of that coalition. And so the question is, for how long, the numbers are not going to catch up. I mean, there's part of it that has to do with the electoral map, and we're living in all the wrong places. But we should move around. I mean, not Justin is in the right place. I should be moving around. Actually, Aron, you're in the right place too. You're in Texas. So I should maybe move around to a place where my vote counts more. But I'm actually part of the secular, majority in which we're actually living in these highly urbanized areas or very blue states.
Taking advantage of my minority status here, I'm going to be running, obviously, as an open atheist. I'm running for Texas State Senate in an all-Republican district.
No, and I think that I think in this era of Trump, I think it's very important for what you're doing, is running for office. What I was telling Justin before we started, that the work that he's been doing on that was genius on the presidential primaries. It's something that we should continue doing, because we are going to come into some very dark times, and I'm not talking just in terms of science policy, to the extent that Trump talking about bringing back Merry Christmas as if it has been ever taken out. But explicitly Christian messaging in government, and probably a lot of, not necessarily, or I hope not suppression, but it's going to be a lot of pressure for a lot of the borderline secular people who have been coming out and increasing the numbers in surveys to probably start calling themselves religious again. Or some of the people who have been thinking, that are saying, that you don't have to be religious, that are seeing people like you, are seeing people like Justin, who are seeing other activists coming out and being proud and secular. When the force of government is against you, you're gonna see probably maybe a decline in the numbers, or you're gonna see a plateau in the numbers of secular people. And so
when I go to the blue states, when I go to the northeast part of the country, I see there's a lot more apathy towards secular activism. They don't see it as being such an issue. Whereas here in Texas and anywhere in the South, really, there's a lot of polarization, where there's a lot of activists who are openly secular because they're against greater opposition. I mean, here in Texas, we have Christian dominionists in charge of absolutely everything, every level of government. And so this generates a lot of, polarized secular activists. And that's what I think is going to happen when you start trying to implement religious law in any degree in federal legislation. You're going to get more activists charged in that.
And that's what I'm for. Sorry to jump in, but I can remember back in 2004 when George Bush beat John Kerry and how it seemed to fire up liberal activists. I remember when Move On came out of nowhere and just was like, hey, we're here to kick ass. Hopefully I can say ass on this podcast. That's already happened. That's what I'm hoping happens in the atheist community and the secular community is, one of the frustrating things for me is that when the Iowa caucus was done, I looked to New Hampshire and thought, oh, this is going to be great. I generated some headlines. There's going to be an atheist over there that does exactly what I did, or there's going to be an atheist group that does exactly what I did. And I had my Google search saved for atheist and election, and I waited and I waited and I waited, and it never happened. And then I said, well, Nevada's up, and then South Carolina, and you know what? It never happened. And I sat here and I said, with all the angst that I hear from the movers and the shakers in the atheist and secular community, why in the hell hasn't there been this huge push to get more activists on the ground? Where's the grassroots effort? The same way that, say, a Social Security group or a Medicare group or an AARP goes out and rallies activists to go out and fight. Where is that within the atheist community? So I'm trying to not be Michael Moore when he said, as bad as we know it's going to be, it's actually going to be worse. I'm thinking this could be the best thing for atheist activists around the country. Aron, I feel the same way here in Iowa. We have a governor here that issued a proclamation saying that all Iowans should read their Bibles out loud at their courthouses for 4 days this past summer. Are you kidding me? And that's what we're up against.
That's a little difficult to believe.
Yeah, and more importantly, there's over 100 federal judgeships that are vacant, plus, of course, the big Escalía seat. So, we may even see a lot of reframing of court decisions and against secularism in this country, depending from the mindset of those judges and knowing the Republican Senate who is gonna confirm those judges. The outlook is not very good. So I think I hope you're right, Justin, because we're gonna have work for a long time.
Yeah, and I want to jump in. I want to jump in there. I want to jump in there, Juhem, with what you said about the judicial seats that are waiting to be filled. Think about all the pending lawsuits right now, especially with Obamacare, with requirements related to birth control, as well as the treatment of LGBT patients. You put in judges that are right-leaning or Christian conservative in their views. This is going to affect everybody listening to this podcast and more. And don't, like you said, Aron, about the people in the Northeast. Yeah, they've become so accustomed to the fact that not a lot of people are religious up in those areas. But guess what? In the heartland of America, it's still very religious. And it's not going to change overnight. We've got to be vocal about this.
So as I said, I'm not nearly as hopeful. I don't think we had 4 years environmentally to allow somebody in a position, in Trump's position, to do the kinds of things that he wants to do. And this is now on a global scale. And I think when you look at at economics, when you look at the Bush years versus the Reagan years and what happened with all of that, it seems that not only economically, but regarding pretty much anything. It seems that the real solution, or the correct solution to any of America's problems, is to do the exact opposite of whatever the Republican Party wants to do. Right? Look at the right to die with dignity, for example, or the legalization of marijuana. Wherever marijuana has been legalized and regulated and so forth, those states have seen a drop in their suicide rates, a drop in their crime rates, a raise in their revenue. I mean, this has been stellar for them. And by the way, this is coming from somebody who does not enjoy marijuana, does not use marijuana, but I advocate the legalization of a drug that I would not partake in if it were still legal everywhere. Because
same here.
We've seen what the results are. And my thought is, instead of building a big damn wall, if you were to legalize marijuana and regulate it in this way, nationwide, would that not completely destroy the crime cartels attached to the Mexican drug trade? I mean, where would their and South America as well? Where are their customers suddenly gone? I mean, what are they going to do? I mean, the only way to win the war on drugs seems to be to give up.
I just think, imagine
that's revenue to build the wall.
I'm sorry, Juhem, say again.
Use the tax revenue from legal marijuana to build the wall. I'm joking. No, but it's a very interesting, sadly interesting time, because what we're seeing is how people are against government. Right? We have like a lot of distrust of government. The Republican Party has been running against government, and when you run all the time against government and you believe government shouldn't do anything, you don't know how to govern, because you think the government shouldn't do anything. And when you think the only things that the government can do are basically protection and surveillance, I mean, that is a scary recipe. The government should stay away of the lives of people, except for the way they behave. Yeah, the government shouldn't help them to live better lives, but they should help them to not live freely.
Yeah, I thought that our primary interest in our government was that the government has a job to do. There's some minimal responsibility to its people. And I would say that I believe in far less government than the conservatives, who say they want less government. And then the conservatives always vote for right-wing authoritarians for as much government as they can and as much regulation of what goes on in your bedroom as they can muster. Right?
Yeah,
and enforcing their political perspective on school children and so forth. I mean, I don't understand the hypocrisy or the contradictions in these people. I want less government than they do. And then I have the anarchists jumping on me. If I say that that government has any purpose at all, or it has a single job to do or a responsibility for its people, then I'm suddenly accused of being a state theist who worships the state, which is just as ridiculous a criticism as I think I've ever heard. But I want the government to worry about raising the quality of life in our country, probably by getting their hands out of everybody's business would be a good idea, and getting their hands out of everybody else in the nation's, in the world's business. Work on our own economy, and let's take some opposite stances toward that. There was a time when taxation on the rich actually got us a better economy, a better distribution of the money than. As Roy Rogers put it once upon a time, so you give the money directly to the rich, that doesn't make any sense. They're going to get it anyway. Give it to the poor first. They'll only have it for a minute, and it'll still go to the rich, but at least the poor will have it for a minute. I would like to see a larger middle class. I don't want wealth redistribution. I don't want everybody to be, of the same financial status or anything like that. Surely not. But what I would like to see is a better middle class and not quite so many poor people. And what we've got here in Texas is a great example of how Republicans screw everything up. Is when it's time to do the abstinence-only sex education, meaning don't teach kids sex education, and then simultaneously deny them contraception and deny them abortion. And then when they invariably get pregnant, right? We have Texas has the highest rate of repeat teen pregnancies in the country, because they've created this positive feedback loop with negative results. And then when you end up with all these kids from kids that didn't know how not to have kids, then you deprive them of all of the social benefit programs like WIC and other programs that would have provided food stamps or whatever for teen mothers and things of that sort. So you just keep making the problem worse, and then cut the education funds, and then start suggesting that maybe we shouldn't have obligatory education, so we can just have poor children, uneducated, wandering the streets, or, as one Republican suggested, the children can re-enter the workforce.
I was just going to joke about
these people want to go back to a third world situation. They want to go back to where we were over 100 years ago.
Yes, that's what I'm telling you. Like we're going back to the maybe not 1920s. Now I'm turning back to 1900s.
Well, and then go with the education route. You look at the voucher system and how that's now the Republican rights or the religious rights next grand fight that they're going to go after. And they'll argue that it has to do with school choice and it has to do with parent choice. Well, wait a minute. Where's the choice that I have as a parent that has children in the public school system? Because for every student that uses a voucher, especially when you consider that, what I think I saw one stat that said 80% of private schools are religious. Well, then literally my tax dollars are funding, the education, religious education. How is that right?
That's another positive feedback loop with negative results. And what that does is it takes the money that was supposed to go to the public schools to teach everybody, and it sends it to these private schools, or which are almost always religious schools, or it sends them to charter schools, which can't be regulated and are prone to a great deal of corruption.
Absolutely.
So public schools then have the more the more privileged kids getting special attention and special funds already, right? That takes them out of the schools, and it leaves them with a larger percentage of the kids that don't have any advantage at all, and the problem students as well. So that without the funds on top of this, that means that the public schools perform lower. They perform much worse. And so by comparison, these people would then argue that the private schools and the charter schools are doing so much better, we should just go with them. And now that we caused the public education system to fail by crippling it on purpose, now we can say that it's a failed system. We can give up on it, and then there we are again. We've got the only people who get an education are the people who can afford it. So welcome back to the turn of the 19th and 20th century. Yep,
exactly.
That's what I'm saying when I talk about people, people who are governing by running against government. When you think that anything that has the word public in it, it's a bad thing, this is what happens. And I think there is there's a real need for progressives, and particularly the Democratic Party, to stop running away from defending the public good and defending running away from anything that it's collective or that benefits our society. Just gets the label of socialist by the Republicans, and everybody runs away from it. And I think people who believe in public education, people who believe in public health, people who believe that our elderly shouldn't die in poverty should be strongly defending those and not running away every time they are attacked.
Now, my thought is that the first priority, and when you're going to be governing a body of people, any collective like this, is you want to be looking out to make sure that everybody's mother is secure and safe. And this is just like a standard that I look at. Can your mother still go to the store, get her medications and everything, and be comfortable? That's the big. And once that's taken care of, then we can argue about other details. But the situation that we're talking about with the Republicans threatens even that.
Would you guys feel that Republicans do so well not because of their policy or not because of the voters, but because of their messaging on issues like this? I kind of get the feeling that the Democratic movement or the liberal agenda just fails to communicate exactly what you just said, Aron, that the Republicans sit out there and say, oh, if you do anything like what Juhem just said, if you do anything for the public, you're a socialist now, and socialism's bad.
Well, they have much more effective. They do have much more effective propaganda than those on the left. But I want to mention also that the Democratic Party, as Bernie Sanders says, the Democratic Party that exists and that we have to have in this two-party system for the moment, if we're going to be using it at all, it needs to be revisioned. There needs to be a serious overhaul in the Democratic Party.
Absolutely.
I would say that I'm not sure. I'm not sure how much better the propaganda or the messaging is. I think part of it has to do with the media that people consume, and that if you constantly, like Barack Obama has said, President Obama has said that if he watched Fox News, he wouldn't like himself. And so, yeah, I think to some extent there's part of that, that these atomized or very divided media environment. But I think also, again, going back, the Electoral College, the popular vote, like Clinton won it. The Democrats have actually won the popular vote in 6 out of the last 7 elections. Last time, the Republican won the popular vote was George W. Bush, and before that was his dad in 1988. And Democratic candidates for Congress tend to get more votes but less seats. So I think part of it is not necessarily messaging, but the fact is that it may be gerrymandering, and I know you did a show on gerrymandering in the Ramen show. I think last year or so, and so there are other institutional aspects in American politics that are helping Republicans gain power, and that actually reinforces, because to the extent that they keep gaining power in state houses and they keep drawing the districts, they're actually making themselves more powerful. Prime example is what just happened in North Carolina.
Yep.
So I think messaging may be part of it, but certainly, if you look at the raw numbers of people who are voting for the Democratic or Republican candidates, assuming that they're all equal in terms of, some sort of basic ideology, the war of numbers is being won by Democratic candidates, but the war of seats and power is being won by the Republicans.
And part of that is this mentality or philosophy that seems to be inherent to the different sides, because on the Republican side, you have people that vote very much as the way they're told, the way their church congregation tells them to vote. When there's low voter turnout, it's low voter turnout on the Democrat side, not on the Republican side. The Republicans are going to vote en masse all the time anyway. And so in a sense, they're following their mission, they're following their plan, they're following. But the Democratic side is the herd of cats. They don't turn out for the down ballot votes. They don't turn out for the midterms, and only on the rare occasion that they feel enchanted with a particular candidate do they turn out pretty much at all. So therein lies the problem. How do you get the herd of cats to come out to vote? As you said, they've done the popular vote. They've done the popular vote a number of times, but it hasn't been with enough numbers that it could actually make a decisive victory against the Electoral College.
I agree. And I'm wondering, how do we apply that same idea to the atheist population of the country? And what is our goal? Not just to talk about Republican and Democrat, liberal and conservative, but now we're going to face a huge challenge, like what you said, Aron, about how congregations follow their churches. And now if the Trump administration repeals or changes the Johnson Amendment, and now churches can sit and put Ted Cruz signs in their church lawn, now we have
been doing that anyway.
Right, exactly. But now they'll be able to do it with support. They'll be able to do it
without fear.
They'll be able to come out of the closet, per se, and just say, yeah, flat out, we want this guy or this lady to be our candidate of our congregation.
Well, I think our opposition is going to have to be a lot more obvious, a lot louder, and a lot more overt.
And actually, to the extent that those rules can extend to other non-profit organizations, or I don't think secular organizations. I think secular organizations can claim that. They can play by the same rule book. So I mean, I think it. I'm not a lawyer, luckily, but it could be an interesting legal argument, I think. But
all right, well, I'm going to invite you guys to do something a little dangerous. I want to make predictions.
I make them exit in an 80-year window, so I am not around to.
Give me that again. What was that?
That I only do predictions in an 80-year window, so I'm not here to.
So you don't have any predictions for, say, this first year, or anytime within the next 4 or 6?
No, 81.
All right. Well, because we have a lot of speculation as to how successful this administration is going to be or can be, and whether this, I really don't think anybody is imagining that there's going to be a second term out of Trump.
But see, I think there were a lot of people that didn't think Trump was going to get elected in the first place. So this election has really taught me personally, don't ever listen to what probably should or shouldn't happen.
Yeah.
History tells us that presidents are reelected. So I think, I don't bet on a 4-year Trump presidency. I think it's very likely because, I mean, if he continues to be as unpopular as he is, he could be. But, I mean, chances are that he's going to be reelected.
Well,
okay, so are you saying, when you say you don't predict a 4-year presidency, are you saying that you do predict an 8-year presidency, or are you saying that you don't expect him to make it 4 years?
You mean that I don't expect him to make him 4 years because he's either going to be impeached, resign, or die in office? Or...
Be careful what you say. The Secret Service might be listening to this interview.
Yeah. Oh, we're not big enough or interesting enough to monitor, right? All right. Well, gentlemen, I think we're going to be closing it out soon. I just would like to get a closing statement for what you expect, or what you're going to be looking out for. Let me put it that way.
Go ahead, Juhem. I got to start. You start with this.
Okay. So, I think we should be vigilant. Many of our most important issues, particularly science, education, and church-state issues, are not gonna go our way for a while, and so we have to be very smart in how we proceed, what battles we pick, and hopefully this is, if something positive comes out of this, is that our secular leadership and our secular numbers increase and become more coherent in what we want to achieve, and hopefully we will have out of this period a strong secular movement, not just in terms of raw numbers, but also in political activism and hopefully in the future political power.
Yeah, well, that remains to be seen. I'll let you know what happens in the midterms. And Justin?
Yeah, my biggest thing, get off your ass and do something. Everybody, anybody listening to this, stop letting me and Aron and everybody else go out and share our stories. You become the next story. Go out and do something. I mean, I'm not saying you have to go to the White House and put on a huge spectacle, but go to your city council, go to your state house, organize a group, talk to 5 people in your neighborhood, do something. Donate to groups like FFRF, American Atheists, American Humanists, Human Rights, ACLU, because these groups aren't going to be able to do this without your support. And, I'm not getting paid to do this. I'm literally a small business owner that's taking time out of my day to go and do this activism because I love it. And I've seen the positive effects from it, but it can't just be a handful of us. It can't be a handful of the bloggers and speakers like Aron that are out, traveling the world doing this. It's got to be all of us. We've got to get off our ass and do something. So without offending too many people or dropping too many cuss words, that's my thought. I'm trying to be as optimistic about the next 4 years as I can. I think there's enough anti-establishment, anti-government sentiment in this country. I could see Trump having 8 years, but that's 8 years of our movement getting up off its ass and doing something and maybe coming together. So let's go herd all of our atheist cats together and do something.
At least get them to vote.
Exactly.
That's the thing I hate hearing the most. It's a broken system. Don't contribute to a broken system. Your vote doesn't count. You know how much your vote counts? That's how we got Trump.
Yep.
All right. So I'm going to go ahead and close it out. Guys, thank you very much for being on the Secular Nation podcast.
Yeah,
Thank
thanks
you.
for having us.